All right, so we're starting a new, somewhat brief series this morning, using content from a book by Tish Warren called Liturgy of the Ordinary. So if you like some of this content, you might consider buying the book. You don't have to have the book to participate in this series, and I'll be supplementing it with some other things as well. But we're calling the series Finding God in the Ordinary. And we're looking at various aspects on this theme of encountering God in ordinary spaces and places in our lives. Let's think about a typical day in your life. What would be from morning through evening, from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed? What are some typical things that make up a routine day in your life? Drinking coffee. Okay. Yeah.
Usually 3 times a day.
What's that?
Eat.
Eat. Okay. Yeah. 3 meals a day.
I sit at my desk quite a bit, and every so often I get up and skip around and sing, and then I go back.
I'd like to see that.
So would others.
I think Julie should video that next time that happens.
We could be office mates.
Sheldon?
Answering lots of emails.
Answering emails. Yeah. Good. Commuting. What else?
Meeting with people.
Meeting with people.
Working out.
Exercising. Yeah.
Meeting with people is when you have an agenda, you have an appointment for something, and you find 30 minutes later, you're talking about something completely totally unrelated, and you have it off.
Yeah. So it's some unexpected things happen. Maybe even interruptions.
8 o'clock is bedtime.
Yeah, 8 o'clock at bedtime. Sure.
I watch the Yankees pretty regularly.
Okay, watching a little TV, watching some sports. Yeah.
Reading social media.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, driving with no reason. Get in your car, listen to the music, just driving with no destination.
I'm probably the only one, but going to the bathroom.
No.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not the only one.
Just,
No one else here does that.
it's okay to be honest.
So I know what John's talking about. It's not what some of you are talking. That's what I'm talking. That's what you're
Put it up while you
saying.
can.
The most important question of what life.
Here, this book by Tish Warren is organized around an ordinary day in her own life. So these are the areas that make up some of her ordinary days: waking up, making the bed, brushing your teeth, losing your keys, eating leftovers, fighting with her husband, checking email, sitting in traffic, calling a friend, drinking tea, and going to bed. So she devotes a chapter to each of these and explores in each one what it might mean to encounter God in a moment like that, how moments like that shape us or form us. So we're not going to do all of those. We're just going to do a handful of those. But that's the approach. Is let's just take an ordinary day and let's try to imagine what it might mean to encounter God in that ordinary day. So a little bit of introduction, and then a bit on brushing your teeth this morning. So the overriding question is, can God be experienced in these ordinary moments? I mean, hopefully when we come here and engage in worship and study together on a particular day in a particular place like this, hopefully there is some experience of God. There's something special, something unique about that. But what a shame it would be if Sunday morning was the only time that really happened, because we're spending vast amount of time during our week in other spaces and doing other things. So this is asking the question, can God be experienced in those ordinary moments? And if so, how? She begins the book with this quote from Kathleen Norris: "We want life to have meaning. We want fulfillment, healing, and even ecstasy. But the human paradox is that we find these things by starting where we are. We must look for blessings to come from unlikely, everyday plans." And I think that's wise counsel there, that if we want to experience a deeper relationship with God, if we want to engage in deeper discipleship and a more holistic way of following Jesus, then we kind of have to start with where we are and what's going on in a typical day. Because if it doesn't happen there, we're missing a whole lot of life. A quote by Tish Warren at the beginning of the book: "The new life into which we are baptized is lived out in days, hours, and minutes. God is forming us into a new people. And the place of that formation is in the small moments of today." So you might just think about, we talk about learning to live a life of love. Well, that seems like a great vision, a great thing to endeavor to do. But we really have to start where we are in order to fulfill that vision, because the ultimate test of that, of living a life of love, comes in the most ordinary moments of the day, like how we respond when someone interrupts us, or what we do with the social media posts that we don't like or we disagree with, whether we listen to a spouse or a grandchild when they speak up to us, how we treat a cashier or someone taking our order. Those are the moments where that vision of living a life of love really plays itself out, really becomes real. And so if we're not thinking about that in the ordinary moments, we miss a whole lot of opportunities to really live that out. And so this idea that the place of formation is in the small moments of today, I think that's really important. A lot of times we might think of, well, the moments of real transformation come when we have a retreat or a special event, or when we read some book that seems to be changing lives all over the world, or we hear a certain speaker or go to a certain concert. And those certainly can be transformative, but couldn't every moment of life, even the small moments of the day, be moments of transformation? I think one way to get a handle on this is to look at the life of Jesus. So if we just take one of the Gospels, the Gospel of Luke, and we sort of follow Jesus from beginning to end in the story, we do find moments where people are encountering Jesus, experiencing Jesus in life-changing ways in places that we might call sacred or special. So there are a number of encounters that people have in the
Are you
gospel.
finished? No,
Yeah.
I'm not rushing you.
Okay. So there are a number of times in the Gospel of Luke where someone might encounter Jesus at the synagogue, and that might be a space where we think, oh yeah, that's a good place for spiritual encounter and spiritual experiences. There are times when people encounter Jesus around the temple in Jerusalem, and you would think, well, yeah, that's probably a sacred space, a place where people might anticipate some kind of spiritual experience. But the vast majority of times when people are encountering Jesus and experiencing some kind of change in their life because of Jesus happen in Luke's gospel in lots of ordinary places. So at the beginning of the gospel, Luke chapter 2, we have the shepherds encountering Jesus at the manger, which there could hardly be a more ordinary space than the manger. It's, for taking care of animals. In Luke chapter 4, we have Jesus entering the home of Simon's mother-in-law, and she's ill, and Jesus provides healing there. All that just taking place in an ordinary home. In Luke 5, Levi's at his tax collecting booth, and Jesus has this encounter with him that ends up really beginning to change his life right there at his workplace. In Luke chapter 8, Jesus and some of the disciples head off in a boat, and in Luke's gospel, it sounds like essentially right when they step off the boat, they're greeted by this fearsome demoniac. And so you could sort of envision that taking place on the beach or at a little dock, or whatever that looked like. But it would have been a very ordinary place, nothing very sacred about it. Luke chapter 10, you've got that famous scene with Mary and Martha. Jesus said, so the disciples have come to the house of Mary and Martha, and Martha's busy doing things, and Mary's sitting at the feet of Jesus, and they have this interaction with Jesus. But that whole encounter just takes place in the home, in their own home. In Luke 14, Jesus is at a meal. There's a man with dropsy there, and healing takes place, and it creates a controversy because it's also taking place on Sabbath. But all that's happening in the course of just a regular meal. Luke 18, there's a blind man on the roadside. Jesus encounters him. I think he's heading out of Jericho, and changes his life. This roadside encounter. Luke 19, the famous interaction with Zacchaeus, who's climbed up in the tree, and Jesus sees him and says, "Today I must come to your house." And so even right there in a tree, they have this encounter with Jesus. Luke 23, Luke doesn't use this language. He doesn't tell us that there's a mob there, but we can sort of imagine as Jesus is making his way to the cross, there are clearly people around, as well as Roman soldiers around, and in that crowd of people, suddenly Simon of Cyrene is there, and he gets tapped to carry the cross of Christ. And what a life-changing encounter that was, in the midst of a crowd, in the midst of a mob. Luke 23, you got two criminals crucified on either side of Jesus, and they're in their execution chamber. They encounter Jesus. And then the great story in Luke chapter 24 is the two disciples are leaving Jerusalem, disappointed at the way that things have played out. And this stranger comes up and walks with them. And we know, they don't, that this stranger is Jesus. And so they're on the roadside. They have an encounter with Jesus, which sort of then culminates at a meal and the breaking of bread, and suddenly they realize who this is with them. So all of these ordinary places in the Gospels become spaces for life encounter with Jesus and transformation with Jesus. And could it be that homes and beaches and meals and roadsides and trees and crowds could also be spaces for encountering Jesus today? Let me just stop there. What are you thinking as we walk through that content, John?
I agree, we start each day new, what we have to look forward to, but I wonder if there's also value in reflecting backwards a little bit. Where have we come from to get to this day?
Mhm.
And where have we already encountered Jesus? Where is our life now? What do we have to look forward to going forward? So it's not like we're starting at zero, we're starting at the sum of all those days
Mhm.
before us. And maybe if we think that way, maybe we'd have greater confidence of
Yeah.
what to look forward to.
Yeah. Because sometimes we be like the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. And Jesus is with us, but we don't really recognize it. Maybe by looking backwards, as they did, we could say, "Oh yeah,
I
yesterday."
bet we could all come up with dozens of examples, just.
Yeah, that's good. Good. Art.
I think what I'm hearing is, we're called to be like agents of Jesus and treat others the way Jesus would have treated us in these ordinary occurrences. Because listen, I might suggest, I'm not really sure, but, and I say this with a lot of hesitation, but I don't believe I'm gonna run into Jesus. Meaning, physically.
Mhm.
And so we're to, portray him through ourselves to others, just like he's impacted our lives, we could help impact some other lives.
Yeah. So these ordinary moments become opportunities to do what Jesus did in his ordinary moments. Yeah, that's good. Julie.
I think that's the way I would ordinarily hear it, and I do appreciate that, but I also kind of like the spin of us being able to encounter Jesus. Jesus even himself says, when I go away, I'll be less limited, and so that we can encounter him when we're by ourselves. And so there's something just really interesting about us encountering Jesus, not us simply being represented. Although I think that's a great viewpoint, but it is interesting that it's a slightly different spin.
Yeah.
There is a very popular sticker I've seen in my French English that says, repent, Jesus is coming, be ready. Like, okay, that's what you think that you missed the word for real, because you pass Jesus every day.
He's already come.
It's already coming. Actually, he never left us.
Yeah.
The blind man will pass on the road. The single mother, you see the young teenager, all Jesus. They are Jesus, actually, in a sense. That's what Jesus called us to do. Jesus, the creative in terms of power. Jesus has everything he needs. He's not asking us to do all we can. He's asking us to do all. There is nothing really of value we can give them that he doesn't already have. So it's like a rich parent. You want to serve someone rich, help their kids in trouble.
Yeah. So there's Jesus' own teaching that whatever you've done for the least of these, you've done for me. The sense that in encountering others in need, we are actually encountering Jesus himself. And of course, those moments often take place in very ordinary spaces and
As
circumstances.
part of the body of Christ, where you are, we are there, we are his representative, we are an extension of the body of Christ. So we can be a person in a mob or on a road.
That's right.
On behalf of our membership in the body of Christ.
Yeah.
And I just tell you that as you should have seen the look on this kid's face with the slice of pizza. Because he hasn't had pizza bar before. He used to be in Chile. You should see that kid joy when he saw a slice of pizza.
It's because it's New York pizza.
Let me share a little bit more from the book. So Alfred Hitchcock said movies are life with the dull bits cut out, car chases and first kisses, interesting plot lines, and good conversation. We don't want to watch our lead character going on a walk, stuck in traffic, or brushing his teeth, at least not for long. We tend to want a Christian life with the dull bits cut out. Yet God made us to spend our days in rest, work, and play, taking care of our bodies, our families, our neighborhoods, our homes. What if all these boring parts matter to God? That's the question being asked here. Okay, so we jump into brushing teeth as something that happens during an ordinary day, and it raises the the larger issue of the care of our bodies and the place of our bodies in our spiritual lives. And so some thinking around that. So she writes, Christians are often accused of two wrong-headed views of the body. One is that we ignore the body in favor of a disembodied spirits floating on clouds spirituality. The other is that we are obsessed with bodies, focusing all our attention on policing sexual conduct and denigrating the body as a dirty source of evil. But the Christianity we find in Scripture values and honors the body. What do you think about that? Can you think of examples where you've seen either of those two sort of extremes in the Christian faith as it's practiced, either ignoring the body or being obsessed with bodies?
I think gluttony's a sin, and gluttony would, not serve you well in terms of your body.
Mhm. And we certainly don't talk about that very much, do we? Yeah.
So I took Luke home for the first time to meet our parents. And after dinner, we're all and Luke left. Mom goes, that boy has tattoos. And I was like, no, Mom, he has 3 of them. Like, and they were no big deal to me. But my mom was like, you can't make him. You can't. And I was like, hold on, do you know what his tattoos are? One's in memory of his dad who passed away. The other's the cross, and then there's American Eagle on his back. I don't think these are like regular tattoos. You know, some people who have tattoos, they don't mean anything. This all had meaning to him. And then about 5 years into our marriage, my mom was like, let's go get tattoos together. She went from being focused on tattoos are so bad to, hey, let's go get a tattoo. So
Yeah, so that's interesting.
yeah.
Our some people's response to something on the body, like a tattoo. Yeah. Any other examples of either ignoring the body or overemphasizing the body?
Well, and again, I'm not sure about this answer. I'm just trying to respond. It might be said that for some, a body could be used as a means towards attracting another. And so, maybe physical fitness could be attractive, male or female. And so you're almost, I should say, crafting your body in such a way so that it would serve you that way.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful perspective. A few more quotes out of this chapter. At root, Christianity is a thoroughly embodied faith. We believe in the incarnation. Christ came in a body, and while he may not have brushed his teeth with a pink Colgate brush like mine, he spent his days in the same kind of bodily maintenance that we do. I think this is a really important point that our faith is an embodied faith, that and we will be embodied for eternity. We are not going to spend eternity as bodiless souls, but as embodied souls. And the incarnation points to the centrality of a body. And just as Jesus cared for his body, so we too are told to care for our bodies. We believe in a God who, by becoming human, embraced human embodiment and fullness right down to the toenails. Because of Christ's embodiment, the way we care for our bodies are not meaningless necessities to keep us well enough to do the real work of worship and discipleship. Instead, these tasks of caring for our bodies, as quotidian as they are, act as an embodied confession that our Creator, who mysteriously became flesh, has made our bodies well and deserves worship in and through our very cells, muscles, tissues, and teeth. If the church doesn't teach us what bodies are for, our culture certainly will. If we don't learn to live the Christian life as embodied beings, worshiping God and stewarding the good gift of our bodies, we'll learn a false gospel an alternative liturgy of the body. Instead of temples of the Holy Spirit, we will come to see our bodies primarily as a tool for meeting our needs and desires. Or we might believe that our bodies should be flawless and spend endless amounts of time and money on creams or Botox or surgery to stave off the reality of our frail and aging bodies. Or we may attempt to ignore embodiment altogether, eating and drinking what we will with no regard for the way our choices violate the call to steward our bodies as gifts. When we denigrate our bodies, whether through neglect or staring at our faces and counting up our flaws, we are belittling a sacred site, a worship space more wondrous than the most glorious ancient cathedral. We're standing before the Grand Canyon or the Sistine Chapel and rolling our eyes. But when we use our bodies for their intended purpose, it is glorious as a great cathedral being used just as its architect had dreamt it would be. So this text here in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 is helpful. This is the translation called the Message. So Paul writes, or didn't you realize that your body is a sacred place, the place of the Holy Spirit? Don't you see that you can't live however you please, squandering what God has paid such a high price for? The physical part of you is not some piece of property belonging to the spiritual part of you. God owns the whole works. So let people see God in and through your body. ESV and other translations have that last line is, so honor God with or in your body. And this is coming at the tail end of the conversation that Paul's having with the Corinthians about sexual immorality and the use of the body in that way. But it clearly applies to a much larger conversation. So let's just talk about that last line here in the Message. Let people see God in and through your body, or honor God in your body, or honor God with your body. What does that look like? How do we honor God with or in our body?
I saw Robert use his body to help us clear all kinds of brush and dead stuff and everything out onto a big piece of tarp and help us get rid of it. An important but everyday action brought to you by Robert's body.
Good. So the use of strength and skill to do some labor that ends up benefiting other people. Yeah.
Or Debbie Paul's feeding Norma at lunch.
Yeah.
I saw a clip of an officer who with a ride in the wheel of oncoming train trying to save someone who was stuck on the train track. She ran in, the person pulled over the train, missed her by a few seconds.
So yeah, literally placing her body in peril for the sake of others.
Taking care of her life and the distance for her to run, be able to move. The body has to be in good form.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Robert.
Eating nutritiously.
Okay. Eating nutritiously.
Yeah.
Taking care of the body. Honors God with or in the body.
For me, exercise is a big part of my life. It's literally to basically keep myself from getting arthritis. Both my parents have it. I was in that car accident as a kid, so I'm grateful to walk every day. So that's me honoring God with my body. It's making sure I get up at 5:30 every morning and go on my walk or whatever, get my exercise in, so that I can keep being the person who wants me to be.
Nice. That's good. Yeah. So these little daily routines, which are decisions that we make to steward the body, care for the body, strengthen the body, become an important part of the way in which we honor God with or in the body. Again, Tish Harrison Warren, when I stand before the sink brushing my teeth and see my reflection in the mirror, I want it to be an act of blessing, where I remember that these teeth I'm brushing are made by God for a good purpose, that my body is inseparable from my soul, and that both deserve care. Because of the embodied work of Jesus, my body is destined for redemption and for eternal worship, for eternal skipping and jumping and twirling and hand raising and kneeling and dancing and singing and chewing and tasting. So that the line there in the middle, that my body is inseparable from my soul and both deserve care. And we do talk a lot as churches about caring for our souls. We don't talk a lot about caring for our bodies. And so the act of brushing your teeth twice a day or once a week, depending on what your routine is, can be one of those reminders that caring for this body is just as important as caring for the soul. When I brush my teeth, I'm pushing back in the smallest of ways the death and chaos that will inevitably overtake my body. I am dust polishing dust, and yet I am not only dust. When God formed people from the dust, he breathed into us through our lips and teeth his very breath. And so a way of thinking about where all this starts with the breath of God and his creating of our bodies with his very hands so that we might honor him in those same bodies. All right. That's all I've got for this morning. We'll take up a few more of these in the next few weeks. Thanks for being here.